Right, so this video is going to cover the short-run cost curves, and this is a topic from Chapter 8. In the short run, firms have some fixed inputs, and the whole idea of a short run in economics is that firms have multiple different inputs, and if you think of our two-factor of production model with labor and capital, if you think of labor can be adjusted relatively quickly. In many types of labor, you can put up a sign saying help wanted or an ad in the paper or a website to relatively quickly hire a new worker. There are other things you could do as well to hire labor even a little faster. You could reach out to, depending on the type of labor, you could reach out to a temp agency, or you could ask your current employees to work overtime. So especially with a temp agency or overtime, you can increase the amount of labor that you're using, or possibly decrease the amount of labor relatively quickly. It might take you days, maybe a week or two. Now, there might be some very special types of labor, like if you're hiring a CEO or like a specialized engineer, where it might take quite a bit of time to hire somebody. But for many types of labor, we might be able to adjust the amount of labor in a matter of days. Contrast this with capital. Capital is our produced factors of production, different types of tools. They include things like specialized machine tools, or factories, or retail stores. And so it takes a lot longer to build like a new factory or to build a new big box retail store than it does to hire new workers. I mean, it might take months, or depending on the type of capital, it could take a year or more to build a oil tanker, or to build a big office building, or a big factory. And so therefore, if you think about it, you have labor that could be adjusted in a matter of days or maybe weeks, capital that could easily take months or maybe years to adjust. That's an economically relevant period of time in which you can adjust some factors of production, but not all factors of production. Or in our two-factor model, you could adjust labor, but not capital. That's the idea of the short run. Some factors of production are fixed, but you can vary others. And how would you want to make those variations? So here's a diagram showing the short run cost curves. There are going to be 4 cost curves. And again, it's based on this idea of a breakdown between fixed costs, that's the fixed input or capital in the two input case, and then variable costs, those costs of the inputs that you can vary, which are like labor in the two input case. We're going to have 4 different curves. I have them drawn up here and all labeled, and now what I'll do is step through each of these different curves. First is the average fixed cost I have drawn up here in blue. The average fixed cost is declining. And that would simply be because whatever your fixed costs are, as you produce more output, you're dividing that fixed cost, maybe like say $10,000, by a bigger and bigger quantity. So your fixed cost per unit has to be declining. You've got this fixed cost, and you divide it over a bigger, you can spread it out over a bigger and bigger number of units of output. So the average fixed cost is going to be declining. The average variable cost I have drawn in here in red, and we have it drawn so it has sort of like a J shape, and it looks a little bit like maybe more like a check mark here, but we have it with a J shape. And that's sort of like the convention here, and the idea being that average variable cost might fall for a while, because if you're thinking of like hiring workers to start producing output, if you've got a big factory, when you have only one person in that factory, they can't be all that productive, so you might actually be able to have a lower variable cost per unit of output over some range of time. But then they're going to start to increase, because you're trying to hire labor. What you're trying to do is you're trying to produce more output, but only by adjusting one input. So that's going to get pretty expensive, and it's going to drive that up. Now, the next curve is in black. That's the average total cost curve. Now, average total costs are the sum of fixed costs and variable costs. Or another thing we'll have in here is that the average total cost must equal the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. And what's going to happen is that average variable cost, average total cost curve is probably going to be U-shaped, like I have drawn here. Because it's the sum of it, you're adding this variable cost plus the fixed cost. Over here, where the quantity is small, the very high average fixed cost is driving the average total cost curve. So average total cost has to be high because the average fixed cost is high. As the average fixed cost starts to decline, we're having this ATC fall like this. But as you get out here, the average total variable costs are getting quite high, and so that starts driving the upward part of the U. And the average total cost curve will rise because average variable costs are rising. Because these the AFC and the AVC are supposed to sum up to ATC, then one thing you should be trying to do is that the ATC curve should be getting closer to the AVC curve as you get to bigger and bigger quantities. Because the difference, the AFC, is shrinking to zero. So these two curves should be getting closer together, reflecting the fact that this curve is going towards zero. The fourth and final curve we have here is the short-run marginal cost. Marginal cost is, as we've defined before, it's the change in cost that you have when you produce one more unit of output. In this case, you're only adjusting the variable input, so it would be the change in the variable input. And so we have that drawn upward sloping. Sometimes you might make it with a little bit of a U here. That's not necessary, but we have this upward sloping short-run marginal cost curve. And the short-run marginal cost curve is intersecting the AVC and the ATC at the bottom of the J and U respectively. And that's another thing that has to be true here. That's due to the mathematical relationship between marginal and average. So just as like your average on exams, and then like the next exam you take is the marginal test score, your average test score, and when you take the next exam and your marginal test score is higher than your average test score, you're going to raise the average. If your marginal test score is below your average is going to fall. And so that's a very general mathematical relationship. Since the variable costs are what's changing, the marginal cost curve is really representing the change in variable cost. So when the change in variable cost is less than the average of the variable cost, the average variable cost curve has to be falling. And then when the change in variable cost is higher than the average of the variable cost, average variable cost curve is rising. So that means the short-run marginal cost curve has to intersect the ABC curve at the bottom of the J. Same argument of marginal and average applies for the ATC as well. So the short-run marginal cost curve has to intersect the ATC curve at the bottom of the U. So these would be the short-run cost curves of the firm in case you're asked to draw this, which there could well be in terms of on an exam. And you have to have all four curves properly labeled and drawn approximately right. And again, in terms of some of the things we're really looking for in terms of grading, the AFC curve should be declining, and that should be clearly demonstrated here. The ABC and ATC curves should be drawn with U shapes. And then that short-run marginal cost curve is going to be upward sloping, but you've got to make sure you hit it at the bottom of this J and U respectively. If you're way off, then that could be something you could lose points for. And one more thing is that the ATC should be approaching the AVC here to reflect the fact that this is going to zero. So there's about four things we can look here. Again, this class isn't about technical drawing, but these are patterns or things that would be true about the curves from an economic standpoint that we would like to see reflected. So if you just like randomly drew the marginal cost curve in here and it wasn't even close to the bottom of the U and the J, you would probably lose at least a little bit of points on if you were asked to draw this. So this is the short run cost curves of the firm. There's four curves, and that's what each of them do.